Successfully seek disconfirming evidence. After thinking of alternative diagnoses using the diagnostic rule of 3, we can actively check for multiple pertinent positives and negatives that would not support our first diagnosis, but do fit with an alternative diagnosis. We rescue ourselves from intuitively but perhaps inappropriately filling in the data that our brains expect for our initial diagnosis. As we seek out pertinent data that support an alternative diagnosis, and actively notice pertinent data that may not fit with our first impression, we hone a more accurate mental model. And when the pieces are not fitting together, or something just isn't right, it helps to ask the team, could this be anything else? Are there other strategies that you want to share, Marjorie?
Yes, there are several. One important strategy is to pay attention to circumstances that may promote biased decisions or otherwise foster cognitive error. We can do this by asking ourselves some of the following questions. Was the diagnosis suggested to me by the patient or by a colleague? Did I consider causes besides the obvious one? Is this a patient I do not like or like too much for some reason? Have I been interrupted or distracted while caring for this patient? Am I stereotyping the patient or the patient's presentation?
Any other favorites?
Another favorite strategy of mine is called prospective hindsight. This can be thought of as a diagnostic timeout, in which we deliberately pause our thinking and imagine finding out later that we were actually wrong right now. Then we examine the current situation for cues that would later be identified as the red flags that were missed. You know, we've all had the experience of listening to another person tell a story of an event gone wrong. And when we're the observer, it's easy to see the unfolding error as predictable or obvious. The purpose of prospective hindsight is to try to harness that benefit of hindsight in the present moment.
But Marjorie, often during an emergency, there isn't time to just stop and think.
Sometimes that's true. When your patient is worsening, but you feel too busy to do a diagnostic timeout, consider calling for help. You know, helpers can take over physical tasks, but they can also help us think through the diagnosis and treatment choices. But you're right, Sarah. Sometimes we've done everything we can think of and the patient is still getting worse. Any suggestions?